Hi, I'm Lorien Dravock. My stepbrother stood up during Dad's will reading and actually laughed when they handed me a scratched $5 watch, while he walked away with the entire $12 million estate. The beach house in Montauk. The investment portfolio. The vintage car collection. Everything. Vorric didn't even try to hide his smile. My stepmother Tahlisse sat there in her black Chanel, dabbing fake tears while watching me hold this cheap timepiece that looked like it came from a gas station. But here's what they didn't see: the lawyer's face, Mr. Castrow's slight smile when he placed that watch in my hand. The way he locked eyes with me for just a second too long. They thought Dad had forgotten me, written me off completely. They had no idea what that $5 watch actually meant, or what Dad and I had planned in his final days. Want to know what happened when I opened the back of that watch? It flipped everything upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't been back to Belhaven in 4 years, not since the night Dad told me I was wasting my life chasing dreams instead of building something real. He said it in front of Vorric and Tahlisse at dinner, made sure everyone heard it. The way he looked at me like I'd disappointed him beyond repair, that was the last conversation we had before I left. The drive from Portland took longer than I remembered. The coastal highway stretched out gray and endless, ocean fog rolling in thick enough to blur the lines between road and sky. I pulled off at the Belhaven exit and immediately felt the weight of memory pressing down. The town looked frozen, like someone had preserved it in amber the day I left. Same brick buildings along Harwick Street. Same coffee shop on the corner where Dad used to take me before school. Same judgmental air that made you feel measured and found wanting before you even opened your mouth. I drove through downtown and turned onto Weatherby Lane, where Castrow and partners sat in a renovated Victorian that probably cost more than most people's houses. The firm handled old money, estate planning, the kind of legal work that happened in leather chairs over scotch and handshakes. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, breathing. In the glove compartment, I found it, the watch. Not the $5 one from the will, the other one. The one Dad gave me when I graduated college, before everything fell apart. It was a Timex, nothing fancy, but he'd had the back engraved. Time reveals all truth. I remembered him handing it to me, his grip firm, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to tell me something he couldn't say out loud. I never understood what he meant. Still didn't. But I wore it today anyway, fastened it around my wrist like a talisman against whatever waited inside. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked in. Young woman, early 20s, designer glasses, the kind of polished indifference you develop working for rich people. I gave her my name. Her fingers stopped mid-type. She glanced up, really looked at me this time, then reached for her headset with something like recognition, maybe pity, crossing her face. Moments later, Mr. Castrow appeared from the back hallway. He was older than I expected, silver hair swept back, charcoal suit tailored within an inch of perfection. But his eyes were kind. That surprised me. "Lorien," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, measured. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my voice level, empty of emotion. He studied me for a beat longer than necessary, then gestured down the hallway. "This way." The corridor smelled like old wood and furniture polish, the kind of scent that screamed money and tradition. Framed photographs lined the walls. Black and white images of Belhaven from decades past. Fishermen on docks. Grand hotels that no longer existed. People in suits shaking hands over deals that built empires or destroyed them. We stopped outside a heavy oak door. Mr. Castrow's hand rested on the handle, but he didn't open it yet. "Before we go in," he said quietly, "I want you to know that your father was very specific about today, very deliberate." His eyes locked onto mine. "Trust the process, Lorien, even when it doesn't make sense." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. He opened the door. The conference room was exactly what I expected. Long mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The late afternoon light cut through in sharp angles, illuminating dust particles floating in the air like tiny ghosts. And there they were. Vorric sat near the head of the table, legs crossed, navy blazer fitted perfectly across his shoulders. He'd always been the golden one. Athletic build, sharp jawline, that easy confidence that came from never having to question your place in the world. When he saw me, his mouth curved into something between a smile and a smirk. Not quite mockery, but close enough. Beside him sat Tahlisse, my stepmother. She'd married Dad 8 years ago, 6 months after my mother passed. Black dress, probably designer, pearls at her throat that caught the light when she moved. Her face was composed in an expression of practiced grief, the kind you see at funerals where people are already mentally dividing up the assets. No one said hello, no acknowledgement that we were family, or had been once. I took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from them as the room allowed. Mr. Castrow settled at the head and opened a leather portfolio in front of him. The room went quiet except for the distant sound of seagulls outside and the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. "Thank you all for being here," Mr. Castrow began, his voice formal, now professional. "As you know, Lorien Dravock's estate is substantial. His instructions were very clear, very specific. He spent considerable time ensuring everything was in order." He began to read. "The beach house in Montauk. 6 bedrooms, private beach access, worth at least $4 million on its own. To Vorric Tenvale. The investment portfolio. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, carefully curated over 40 years. Estimated value $5.8 million. To Vorric Tenvale. The vintage car collection. A 1967 Shelby GT 500. A 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. A 1963 Corvette Stingray. 5 cars total, each one immaculate, each one worth a fortune to the right collector. To Vorric Tenvale. The Thorndale property. 20 acres of coastal land with a main house, guest cottage, and private dock. Appraised at $2.1 million. To Vorric Tenvale. Every item, every asset, every piece of the empire Dad had built, all of it flowing to Vorric like water finding its level. Vorric didn't even pretend to be humble. He leaned back in his chair, that smile growing wider with each line Mr. Castrow read. At one point he glanced over at me and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Told you." He knew who really deserved it. I didn't respond, didn't even blink. My hands stayed folded on the table in front of me, absolutely still. Tahlisse touched her eye with a silk handkerchief, a performance of sorrow that fooled no one. "It's what Arundel wanted," she said softly, as if we were supposed to believe she hadn't orchestrated every signature, every clause. My stomach was churning, sure, but I'd prepared myself for this. I knew what kind of man my father had become in those final years. Bitter, disappointed, convinced that success meant money, and legacy meant property. But then Mr. Castrow's hand moved to a small velvet box sitting beside the portfolio. "There is," he said slowly, deliberately, "one item designated for Lorien Dravock." Vorric's smile faltered just slightly. Tahlisse's hand froze mid-dab. Mr. Castrow opened the box and removed a watch. Even from where I sat, I could see it was cheap, scratched plastic face, fake leather band. The kind of watch you'd find in a convenience store next to the cigarettes and lottery tickets. He slid it across the table toward me. "A Casio F91W digital watch," Mr. Castrow said, his voice absolutely neutral. "Purchased by your father approximately 6 weeks before his passing. Appraised value, $5. The room erupted. Vorric laughed, actually laughed. The sound bounced off the walls sharp and cruel. "A $5 watch. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect." Tahlisse shook her head slowly, that fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Oh, Lorien, I'm so sorry." Arundel must have been quite confused toward the end. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Mr. Castrow, and he was smiling. The watch sat in front of me like a bad joke, scratched plastic face reflecting the overhead lights, fake leather band curled against the polished mahogany. $5. After everything, after 43 years of being his son, this is what I was worth in the end. Vorric was still laughing, quieter now but somehow more cutting. Tahlisse had put away her handkerchief, the performance of grief abandoned now that the real show was over. She was whispering something to Vorric, probably already planning how to divide the spoils, where to vacation first, which car to drive to which property. I reached out and picked up the watch. Light, cheap, The band felt like it would snap if I pulled too hard. I turned it over in my hands, examining it the way you might examine a piece of evidence at a crime scene. The back was smooth plastic, nothing engraved, nothing special. Just a mass-produced timepiece that probably came from a discount bin. But Mr. Castrow was still watching me. His eyes hadn't left my face since he'd placed the watch on the table. There was something there, in his expression. Not pity, something else. Patience, maybe, or knowledge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "That's it," Vorric said, leaning forward. "That's the big inheritance? A gas station watch?" He shook his head, grinning. Dad really knew how to send a message. "Vorric?" Tahlisse said, but there was no real reprimand in her voice, just a thin veneer of propriety. I didn't respond. Instead, I looked at Mr. Castrow. "Is there anything else?" He held my gaze for a long moment. "Not at this time, Mr. Dravock. However, I do need to ask you to stay for a brief private consultation. Just a formality. 10 minutes of your time." Vorric stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "Private consultation? For what?" He got a $5 watch. "What's there to consult about?" Mr. Castrow's voice remained perfectly professional. "Estate protocol, Mr. Tenvale. Even minor distributions require certain paperwork. I'm sure you understand." Tahlisse was already gathering her Prada handbag, clearly ready to leave, ready to celebrate. She touched Vorric's arm. "Let them handle their paperwork, dear. We have the estate manager meeting in an hour anyway, for the Montauk property." Vorric looked like he wanted to argue, but Tahlisse's hand tightened on his arm. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but this better not be some attempt to contest anything. The will is ironclad." "Absolutely ironclad," Mr. Castrow agreed smoothly. They left. Tahlisse's heels clicked down the hardwood hallway, sharp and receding. Vorric's voice carried back, saying something about calling the real estate agent, something about yacht clubs in Montauk. Then the front door opened and closed, and the building fell quiet. Mr. Castrow waited, 30 seconds, a full minute. Then he stood, walked to the door, and locked it. The click of the deadbolt seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. He returned to his seat, but something had changed in his demeanor. The formal distance was gone. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked almost human. "Your father was a complicated man," he said quietly. "Difficult, stubborn. But he wasn't stupid, Lorien, and he wasn't cruel. Not in the way you might think." I set the watch down carefully. "Could have fooled me." That was the point. Mr. Castrow's eyes flicked to the watch, then back to my face. The cruelty was theater. Necessary theater. Necessary for what? For protecting what actually matters. He reached into his portfolio and pulled out a sealed envelope. Cream-colored paper, expensive stock, my name written across the front in Dad's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, those sharp, angular letters he'd used to sign everything from business contracts to birthday cards. My hand trembled slightly as I took the envelope. I hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected my body to react to seeing his handwriting again, to knowing these might be some of his last written words. "He gave me this 6 weeks before he died," Mr. Castrow said. "Made me promise to deliver it to you only after the main reading. Only after Vorric and Tahlisse believed they'd won everything." I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I opened it. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but still unmistakably his. "Lorien, if you're reading this," Castrow followed my instructions. "Good. By now Vorric thinks he owns everything. Let him think that for exactly 48 hours. Don't contest. Don't argue. Just wait. On the third day, take the watch to Lorien Jewelers on Harbor Street. Ask for Sylvan. Give him the watch. He'll know what to do. Trust me one more time, son. I know I don't deserve it, but trust me anyway, the watch isn't what it seems. Nothing is. Dad." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. I looked up at Mr. Castrow. "Lorien Jewelers? Sylvan." He nodded. "Sylvan Vorric. He's been the family jeweler for 30 years. Your father trusted him completely." But this is just a cheap watch. There's nothing. I turned it over again, examining it more carefully. There's nothing hidden here. No secret compartment. No. I don't know what's inside it, Mr. Castrow interrupted. Your father didn't tell me. He only told me to make sure you got that note, and to make sure Vorric left believing he'd inherited everything. He paused. He also told me something else. What? He said my son will understand. He's the only one who ever really listened. Something caught in my throat. I pushed it down, buried it. I don't understand any of this. You will. Mr. Castrow stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. 48 hours, Lorien. That's what your father asked for. 2 days of letting them think they won. Can you do that? I stared at the watch, at the letter, at the impossible situation my father had left me in. Even in death, he was playing games, creating puzzles, testing me. Part of me wanted to throw the watch across the room, walk out, never look back. But another part, the part that had spent 43 years trying to understand this man, couldn't let it go. Yeah, I said finally, I can do that. Mr. Castrow turned back to face me. One more thing, don't tell anyone about the note. Not a friend, not a girlfriend, no one. If Vorric finds out there's something more, he'll move faster than you can imagine. Your father built something, Lorien. Something important. But it's fragile right now. It needs time. I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket. What did he build? Mr. Castrow smiled, sad and knowing. The truth. He built the truth. And in 48 hours, everyone's going to see it. I left the law office in a daze. The sun was setting over Belhaven Harbor, painting the water in shades of orange and purple. Boats rocked gently at their moorings. Tourists walked along the pier, laughing, taking photos, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. I got in my car, but didn't start it. Instead, I sat there with the watch in one hand and the weight of my father's final request in the other. 48 hours. 2 days of pretending. 2 days of letting Vorric celebrate while I waited for whatever revelation was coming. My phone buzzed. A text from Vorric. Drinks at Harwick Tavern tonight. Celebration. You should come. See what real success looks like. I stared at the message. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to go to my hotel and wait out the 48 hours alone. But something else, something Dad's note had awakened, made me reconsider. If I was going to wait 2 days, I might as well see what Vorric was planning. Know your enemy, Dad used to say. Watch, listen, learn. I texted back, I'll be there. Then I started the car and drove toward my hotel, the cheap watch sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking time bomb. Harwick Tavern sat on the corner of Main and Seabreeze, a restored warehouse that used to house fishing equipment back when Belhaven actually worked for its money. Now it was all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, craft cocktails with names like the Nor'easter and Foggy Bottom, the kind of place where Vorric felt at home. I arrived at 8. Through the windows I could see him already holding court at a large corner table, surrounded by faces I half recognized, old friends of Dad's. Business associates. People who smelled opportunity and gathered around it like gulls around fishing boats. The moment I walked in, conversations stuttered, heads turned. I felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their pity. Poor Lorien. 43 years old and his father left him a $5 watch. What did he do to deserve that? Vorric saw me and stood, that wide smile plastered across his face. There he is, the man of the hour! His voice carried across the room. He was already 3 drinks in, maybe 4. His cheeks were flushed, his movements loose. Come on, Lorien, pull up a chair. We're celebrating Dad's legacy. Legacy. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I walked over. The group made space grudgingly, shifting chairs, moving glasses. I recognized some faces now. Gerald Pembroke, who owned half the commercial real estate in Belhaven. Nadira Quelith, a venture capitalist Dad had worked with on the Thorndale development. A few others whose names I'd forgotten or never learned. Lorien, Nadira said, her voice dripping with false warmth, I was so sorry to hear about the will. That must have been quite a shock. Life's full of surprises, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Vorric laughed and clapped me on the shoulder, harder than necessary. Dad knew what he was doing. He always did. Built an empire from nothing, and he made sure it went to someone who could handle it. He took a long drink from his whiskey, ice clinking against glass. No offense, little brother, but you and I both know business was never your strong suit. I said nothing, just watched, listened. Tahlisse arrived 20 minutes later, making an entrance in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She kissed Vorric on the cheek, squeezed shoulders, played the gracious widow with practiced precision. When she reached me, she paused. Her smile was thin, surgical. "Lorien, I didn't expect you to come." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Such a good sport." She patted my hand, the gesture somehow both maternal and condescending. "You know, I tried to talk to Arundel about the will, tried to make him see reason, but he was so stubborn toward the end, so fixated on certain ideas about who deserved what." "He always knew his own mind," I replied. "That he did." She moved past me to join Vorric, their heads bending together in quiet conversation. Planning. Calculating. I could see it in the way their eyes moved, tracking the room, assessing allies. The evening wore on. Drinks flowed. Voices got louder. Vorric held court like a king, accepting congratulations, making promises about investments and partnerships. At one point he stood and raised his glass. "To Dad," he announced. "Lorien Dravock, a man who built something real, something lasting. A man who understood that legacy isn't about sentiment, it's about strength. It's about knowing who can carry the torch forward and who can't." Everyone raised their glasses. To Arundel. I raised mine too, barely touching it to my lips. Across the table, Gerald Pembroke leaned toward me. He'd been watching me all night with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How are you holding up, Lorien? Really?" "I'm fine," I said. "That watch thing," he shook his head. "That was harsh, even for Arundel. You two had a falling out years ago, didn't you?" "Something like that." "What was it about, if you don't mind me asking?" I considered how much to say. Gerald had been Dad's friend for 30 years. They'd started the commercial development business together, back before Belhaven became what it was now. If anyone might know something useful, it was him. "Dad thought I was wasting my time," I said finally. "I wanted to go into environmental consulting, help businesses transition to sustainable practices." He called it naive. Said real men build empires, they don't save trees. Gerald's expression shifted, something almost like recognition crossing his face. "Environmental consulting, that's what you've been doing in Portland?" "For the last 4 years. Small firm, but we're doing good work." He was quiet for a moment, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "You know, your father and I had a conversation about a year ago. We were going over some new development proposals, and he asked me what I thought about sustainable building practices. Green certifications. Solar integration. I told him it was the future but expensive. Know what he said?" I waited. He said, "Lorien tried to tell me that 10 years ago. Maybe I should have listened." Gerald looked at me directly. That's the only time I ever heard him admit he might have been wrong about something. The words hit harder than I expected. I gripped my glass tighter, using the cold to anchor myself. He never said that to me. "No," Gerald agreed. He wouldn't have. Pride was his greatest asset and his worst enemy. He paused. "For what it's worth, I think he regretted how things ended between you two. He just didn't know how to fix it." Before I could respond, Vorric's voice cut through the conversation. "Lorien, stop monopolizing Gerald. Come here. I want to show you something." I walked over. Vorric had his phone out, swiping through photos. "Look at this. The Montauk property. 6 bedrooms, private beach. I'm thinking we renovate the west wing, put in a wine cellar. Maybe a home theater." He kept swiping. "And the cars. The Shelby's going to need some work, but once it's restored, we're talking $500,000 easy." "We?" I asked. "Well, me," he laughed. "Force of habit." Dad always said, "we," when he talked about the business. Guess I picked it up. Tahlisse appeared at his elbow, her expression tight. "Vorric, darling. Gerald was just telling me about the Harborview development. Perhaps we should discuss it, in private." Something passed between them, quick, urgent. Vorric's smile faltered for just a second, then snapped back into place. "Right. Business never sleeps." He looked at me. "Stick around, Lorien. Have another drink. On me. On Dad's estate, I guess. He found that funny. They moved to a quieter corner of the tavern, heads together, voices low. I watched them from across the room. Tahlisse's hands moved as she spoke, emphatic, insistent. Vorric listened, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to something harder. They were planning something. Something that couldn't wait. I checked my watch, the cheap one in my pocket, but also the Timex on my wrist. Almost 10. I'd been here 2 hours, and I'd learned what I needed to learn. Vorric was already moving assets in his mind, already spending money that technically wasn't his yet. Tahlisse was pushing him, driving him forward, making sure there was no pause, no reflection, just momentum. They were afraid of something. I could see it now, in the urgency of their whispered conversation, in the way Tahlisse kept glancing around like she expected someone to challenge them. But who? I was the only person who might contest the will, and they'd just watch me accept a $5 watch without argument. Unless they knew something I didn't, unless Dad had left more traps than just the one I'd discovered. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and stood. Time to leave. Time to wait out the 48 hours and see what Sylvain Malif would reveal. But as I headed for the door, Tahlisse caught my arm. Her grip was strong, her nails pressing into my jacket sleeve. "Lorien," she said quietly, her voice different now, stripped of the performance. "Don't do anything stupid. The will is final. Legal. If you try to contest it, you'll lose everything, including your dignity." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "I'm not contesting anything." Good, but she didn't let go. "Your father made his choice. He chose Vorric because Vorric understands business, understands legacy. You need to accept that and move on with your life." "I have moved on," I said, 4 years ago. "Then why are you here?" It was a good question. I pulled my arm free gently. Same reason everyone else is, paying respects. I walked out into the night. The air was cold, coming off the harbor, sharp with salt and the smell of low tide. Behind me, through the windows of Harwick Tavern, I could see Vorric laughing again, the king restored to his throne, surrounded by subjects who would follow him as long as the money flowed. But I'd seen the fear in Tahlisse's eyes, felt the urgency in her grip. They knew something was coming, they just didn't know what. Neither did I. But in 36 hours I'd find out. I spent the next day in a cheap hotel on the outskirts of Belhaven, the kind of place with thin walls and a view of the parking lot, where the continental breakfast was stale muffins and weak coffee. It was perfect. Anonymous. A place to disappear while I waited out Dad's 48-hour requirement. The watch sat on the nightstand, that cheap plastic face reflecting the afternoon light coming through the window. I'd examined it a dozen times already, looking for hidden compartments, secret engravings, anything that might explain why Dad had chosen this particular object. But there was nothing. Just a mass-produced Casio F91W that you could buy at any convenience store for the price of a sandwich. My phone kept buzzing. Text messages mostly. A few calls I didn't answer. One from Vorric. "Lawyers say the estate transfer will be complete by Friday. Just a formality. Hope you're doing okay. No hard feelings, right?" One from Tahlisse. "Lorien, I'd like to speak with you before you leave town. There are some personal items of your father's that didn't make it into the will. Photos, books, things you might want. Call me." I deleted them both. But there was one message I did read, from Gerald Pembroke. "Lunch tomorrow? My treat. No agenda. Just thought you might want company." I stared at that one for a while. Gerald had been kind at the tavern, shown something close to genuine sympathy. But kindness in Belhaven usually came with strings attached. Still, I had another full day to kill before I could visit Feldrin Jewelers. Might as well spend it productively. I texted back, "Noon, Seabreeze Cafe." The rest of the day dragged. I tried to work, pulling up files from my Portland consulting firm on my laptop, but the numbers blurred. My mind kept drifting back to the letter, to Dad's shaky handwriting, to his final instruction, "Trust me one more time, son." Trust. That was the thing I'd lost years ago. The thing that broke the night he told me I was wasting my life, that environmental work was a hobby for rich people who didn't understand real business. We'd been in his study, surrounded by his trophies and awards, his empire-building certificates, and he'd looked at me like I was a stranger, like I'd betrayed him by wanting something different. I'd left the next morning, drove to Portland and didn't look back. And now he wanted me to trust him. From beyond the grave, through a $5 watch and a cryptic note. I fell asleep with the light on, the watch still sitting on the nightstand like a guardian or a warning. The next morning, I arrived at Seabreeze Cafe 10 minutes early. It was a local place, not tourist trap pretty but functional, the kind of spot where fishermen got coffee at 5 in the morning and business people had working lunches. Gerald was already there, sitting at a corner booth with a view of the water. He stood when I approached. "Lorien, thanks for coming." We shook hands and sat. A waitress appeared almost immediately, poured coffee, took our orders. Gerald waited until she left before speaking. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the tavern," he said, "about what your father said, about you being right 10 years ago." "Ancient history," I replied. "Maybe, maybe not." He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. "Here's the thing. Your father changed in his last year, started asking different questions. About legacy, about impact, about what really matters when you're staring down the end. He left everything to Vorric. In the public will, yes." Gerald's eyes locked onto mine. "But your father was a chess player, Lorien, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Always setting up pieces the other person couldn't see until it was too late." Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your father came to me 6 months ago with a question. He wanted to know what it would take to convert the Thorndale property into a conservation trust. Protected land, nature preserve, educational center." Gerald leaned forward. "He wanted to know if it was possible to structure it so that it could never be developed, never be sold, never be turned into another luxury resort." The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted bitter. "Thorndale, but he left that to Vorric." "Did he?" Gerald's expression was carefully neutral. "Or did he leave Vorric the illusion of Thorndale while the reality was something else entirely?" "I don't understand." "Neither do I, not completely. But your father was very specific about one thing. He said Lorien will know what to do when the time comes. He's the only one who ever really understood what I was trying to build." Gerald paused. "What did he give you, Lorien, in the will?" I hesitated. Mr. Castrow had told me not to tell anyone. But Gerald was different. He'd been Dad's friend for 30 years. He'd been there for conversations I'd never heard, decisions I'd never witnessed. "A watch," I said finally. $5 digital watch." Gerald's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. Did he leave any instructions with it? "Why do you ask?" "Because 6 weeks before he died, your father called me. 3 in the morning. I could tell he'd been drinking, but he was lucid, sharp. He said, 'If anything happens to me, trust Lorien. Whatever he does, however strange it seems, trust him. He's carrying something forward that I started but couldn't finish.'" Gerald took a sip of coffee. I asked him what he meant. He said, "You'll know. When the watch starts ticking, you'll know." The watch starts ticking. What did that mean? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mr. Dravock?" A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "Yes." "This is Tahlisse Norwick from Pemberton & Associates. We represent the Dravock estate. I'm calling to inform you that there's been a development regarding the will." My stomach dropped. "What kind of development?" "Mr. Vorric Tenvale has filed a motion to accelerate the estate transfer. He's claiming that you indicated an intention to contest the will, and he wants to secure the assets before any legal challenges can be mounted." "I never said I'd contest anything." "Nevertheless, the motion has been filed. There will be a hearing tomorrow morning at 9. You're welcome to attend, though I should inform you that Mr. Tenvale has significant legal representation. The firm believes his motion will be approved." Tomorrow morning, I looked at my watch. The Timex. It was 12:47. That meant the 48 hours would be up in just over an hour. What happens if the motion is approved? The estate transfers immediately. All assets become Mr. Tenvale's legal property. Any future contest would be significantly more difficult. She paused. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dravock. I know this must be difficult." She hung up. I set the phone down carefully. Gerald was watching me. "They're accelerating the transfer," I said. "Tomorrow morning." "Bastards." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Tahlisse is behind this." She always was the smart one. She knows something's coming, so she's trying to lock down the assets before it arrives. I checked my watch again. 1 hour and 13 minutes until the 48 hours were up. 1 hour and 13 minutes until I could go to Lorien Jewelers and see what Sylvan Vorric had to tell me. I have to go, I said, standing. Lorien, wait. Gerald grabbed my arm. Whatever your father set up, whatever he gave you, be careful. Vorric might seem like a fool, but Tahlisse isn't. She'll fight dirty if she thinks you're a threat. I know. Do you? His grip tightened. Your father died of a stroke. Sudden, unexpected. He'd just had a full physical 2 months before. Clean bill of health. He let that sink in. I'm not saying anything for certain, but I am saying be careful who you trust. The implication hit me like cold water. You think someone killed him? I think your father made powerful enemies when he started asking questions about conservation trusts and legacy. I think some people had a lot to lose if he changed his mind about who should inherit what. Gerald released my arm. Just be careful. And whatever that watch is, whatever it opens or reveals, make sure you're ready for what comes next. I left the cafe and drove straight back to the hotel. Grabbed the cheap watch from the nightstand, checked the time, 47 minutes. I couldn't wait anymore. I got in my car and drove toward Harbor Street, toward Lorien Jewelers, toward whatever truth my father had hidden in the $5 watch. The streets of Belhaven blurred past. Afternoon sun glinted off windows and windshields. Normal people going about normal lives, completely unaware that everything I thought I knew about my father, about my family, about the last 4 years of exile and silence, was about to change. I parked across from Lorien Jewelers. It was a small shop, wedged between a bookstore and a wine merchant, the kind of place that had probably been there for generations. The sign above the door was hand-painted, faded by salt air and time. I sat in the car, watch in hand, and stared at the door. 48 hours. Dad had asked for 48 hours of patience, of trust, of faith in a man I thought had abandoned me. The watch face read 1:58. Close enough. I got out of the car and walked toward the truth. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door to Lorien Jewelers. The shop was smaller than it looked from outside, narrow and deep, with glass cases running along both walls. Estate jewelry glinted under warm lights. Pocket watches, vintage rings, the kind of pieces that carried stories in their scratches and patina. An older man emerged from the back room, late 60s, maybe 70, with silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He wore a jeweler's loop on a chain around his neck and a leather apron over his shirt. "Can I help you?" His voice was measured, careful. "I'm looking for Sylvan," I said. "Sylvan Marsh?" His expression shifted, something closing off behind his eyes. "Who's asking?" "Lorien Dravock." The change was immediate. His whole body seemed to relax, and something like relief crossed his face. "Finally," he said, quietly. He glanced toward the front window, scanning the street, then moved to the door and flipped the sign to closed. "I've been expecting you for 2 days. Your father said you'd come exactly 48 hours after the reading. How did you know when the reading was?" "Your father told me. He planned everything, down to the minute." Sylvan gestured toward the back room. "Come, we don't have much time. If Vorric finds out you're here, he'll move faster than we can stop him." I followed him through a curtain into a workshop. Jeweler's tools covered a large wooden bench. A microscope sat next to neat rows of tiny drawers. The air smelled like metal polish and something else, something chemical I couldn't identify. Sylvan turned to face me. "You have the watch?" I pulled it from my pocket and held it out. The cheap Casio sat in my palm, looking even more absurd in a jeweler's workshop surrounded by pieces worth thousands. He took it carefully, almost reverently, and carried it to the bench. Under the bright task light, he examined it closely, turning it over, checking the edges. Then he reached for a specialized screwdriver, one of those precision tools for electronics. "Your father brought this to me 7 weeks ago," Sylvan said as he worked. He'd been planning something for months, maybe longer. But he needed the right vessel. Something cheap, something that wouldn't raise questions, something that Vorric and Tahlisse would dismiss immediately. The back of the watch popped open. Sylvan set down the screwdriver and picked up a pair of tweezers. He made me promise not to tell anyone, Sylvan continued. Not my wife, not my business partner, no one. He said lives depended on it, futures depended on it. He looked up at me. He said you'd understand what to do with what's inside. With careful precision, he lifted something from inside the watch case. It was small, barely larger than a fingernail, a micro SD card. My heart hammered against my ribs. What's on it? I don't know, your father didn't tell me, but he said it contains everything. The truth about what Vorric did. The truth about Tahlisse. The truth about how he really wanted his legacy to unfold. Sylvan placed the card in my palm. It weighed almost nothing, but it felt heavy as stone. There's more, Sylvan said. He reached under the workbench and pulled out a manila envelope, sealed with red wax. This arrived by courier the day after your father died. Instructions said to give it to you when you came for the watch. I broke the seal. Inside were documents, legal documents. I recognized some of the headers immediately. Trust agreements, property deeds, corporate filing papers. My hands shook as I read. The first document was a trust agreement dated 18 months ago, the Dravock Conservation Trust. Established with Thorndale as the primary asset, along with 60% of Dad's liquid assets. The purpose stated clearly, to preserve coastal ecosystems and provide environmental education in perpetuity. The trustee listed, Lorien Dravock. I flipped to the next page. A deed transfer, filed with the county but marked as sealed until a specific trigger date. The trigger, 48 hours after the reading of Lorien Dravock's will. Thorndale wasn't Vorric's. It never had been. The will reading had been theater, just like Mr. Castrow said. A performance to make Vorric feel secure while the real distribution happened in sealed documents and hidden micro SD cards. He gave me nothing in the public will on purpose, I said, the realization hitting me, so no one would look too closely, so Vorric would think he'd won completely. Your father understood human nature, Sylvan agreed. He knew Vorric's greed would make him careless. Knew Tahlisse's ambition would make her rush to secure everything before anyone could question it. He paused. But there's something else you need to know. Something your father discovered about 6 months before he died. I looked up from the documents. Sylvan's expression was grim. Your father came to me in April. Said he'd found something. Evidence that Vorric had been embezzling from the family businesses for years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts. The room seemed to tilt. Dad knew? He knew. And he was gathering proof. That's what's on that card, I suspect. All the evidence he collected. Bank records. Transfer receipts. Communications between Vorric and Tahlisse about how to hide the money. Sylvan took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. He was going to confront them, but then he had the stroke. Gerald's words from lunch echoed in my mind. Your father died suddenly, unexpected. He'd just had a clean bill of health. You think they killed him, I said. Sylvan didn't answer directly. I think your father knew he was in danger. That's why he set up all these contingencies. The sealed trusts, the hidden SD card, the 48-hour delay. He was buying time, making sure that even if something happened to him, the truth would still come out. I looked at the card in my hand. So small. But if Sylvan was right, it contained everything. Years of fraud, evidence of embezzlement, maybe even evidence of murder. What do I do with this? I asked. What your father trained you to do, Sylvan said. You find the truth, you document it, you make it impossible to ignore. He handed me a card reader, one of those small USB devices. There's a law firm in Portland, Brecken and Associates. Your father said you'd know them. Said they handled environmental cases, corporate fraud cases, cases where the powerful tried to hide their crimes behind money and lawyers. I did know them. I'd worked with them on 2 consulting cases, helping them understand the environmental impact of corporate malfeasance. They were good, thorough, relentless. He said to take everything to them, Sylvan continued. Let them build the case. Let them do it right, legally, so that when it comes out, there's no wiggle room, no way for Vorric to buy his way out. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Castrow. Hearing moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Vorric is pushing hard. They know something's wrong. Be careful. They're accelerating everything, I said, showing Sylvan the message. The estate transfer, the asset seizure. They're scared. They should be. Sylvan walked to a safe in the corner, opened it, and pulled out one more envelope. "Your father left this too. A letter. He said to read it after you had everything else. After you understood what he'd built." The envelope had my name on it. Just my name, in Dad's handwriting, but steadier this time. This letter had been written earlier, before the illness, before the shaking hands. I opened it carefully. "Son, if you're reading this, then the dominoes are falling the way I planned. I know the last 4 years have been hard. I know I said things I can't take back, but I need you to understand something. I was wrong. About you. About what matters, about legacy. You tried to tell me 10 years ago that business without conscience is just greed with a spreadsheet. I laughed at you, called you naive, told you to grow up and learn how the real world works. But you were right, and I spent the last year of my life trying to fix what I broke. The money, the properties, the business empire. Vorric can have the shell of it. Let him think he won. But the heart of what I built, the land, the resources, the future, that belongs to you, because you're the only one who knows what to do with it. I can't undo the past. Can't fix the time we lost. But I can give you the tools to build something better. Something that matters. Finish what I started, Lorien. Make the legacy mean something. I'm proud of you. I should have said it years ago. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of who you became despite me, Dad." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my pocket next to the SD card. Sylvan was watching me, patient, understanding. "What will you do?" I looked at the documents spread across his workbench. The trust agreements, the sealed deeds, the evidence of fraud hidden in a $5 watch. All of it carefully constructed, painstakingly planned, built by a man who'd realized too late what really mattered. "I'm going to finish it," I said. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. And then, I'm going to build what he should have built from the beginning." Sylvan nodded slowly. "He said you would. Said you were the only one strong enough to carry it through." I gathered everything. The documents, the SD card, the letter. All of it went into my jacket, pressed against my chest like armor. "One more thing," Sylvan said as I turned to leave. "Your father told me that if Vorric discovered what you were doing, he'd fight. Not just legally. He said Vorric has connections. Dangerous ones. People who make problems disappear. I'll be careful. Be more than careful." Sylvan gripped my shoulder. "Be smart. Be strategic. Be everything your father taught you to be, and everything he wasn't." I left through the back door, emerging into an alley that smelled like salt water and old fish. The sun was lower now, painting everything in orange and shadow. I had less than 18 hours before the hearing. 18 hours to get to Portland, to get to Brecken and Associates, to build a case that would stand up in court. But as I walked toward my car, I saw it. A black Mercedes parked across the street, tinted windows, engine running. Waiting. They knew. Somehow, they knew. And the war Dad had started was about to become mine. I didn't go to the Mercedes. Instead, I walked the opposite direction, down the alley, through a narrow passage between buildings that opened onto a side street 3 blocks away. Old habits from my younger days in Belhaven, when I'd needed to avoid certain people, certain conversations. The town's layout was still mapped in my memory. My car was compromised. They'd been watching the jewelry shop, which meant they'd been following me, maybe since I left the hotel. I needed somewhere safe to look at what was on that SD card. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look. The Belhaven Public Library sat on Cartwright Avenue, a brick building that had been there since the 1920s. I slipped inside through the back entrance, past the community room where someone was teaching a pottery class, and found a computer station in the far corner of the research section. The kind of spot where homeless people checked email and students wrote papers, anonymous, invisible. I plugged in Sylvan's card reader. The SD card held a single folder labeled Legacy. Inside were dozens of files, spreadsheets, PDFs, scanned documents, video files. I started with the spreadsheets. Financial records dating back 8 years. Dad had been meticulous, color-coding transactions, highlighting discrepancies, tracking money as it moved through various accounts. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Vorric had been siphoning money from Harper Development LLC, the family's primary real estate holding company. Small amounts at first, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, disguised as consulting fees paid to shell companies. But it had grown. In the last 2 years alone, he'd moved nearly $300,000 through a web of LLCs registered in Delaware and Nevada. But it wasn't just embezzlement. The documents showed something worse. Vorric had been actively sabotaging Dad's legitimate business deals, tanking profitable projects so he could purchase the land through his shell companies at bankruptcy prices. He'd been cannibalizing the family business from the inside, getting rich while making it look like Dad's business acumen was failing. I clicked on one of the video files. The timestamp showed it was recorded 4 months ago. Dad's face filled the screen. He was in his study, the one with the leather chairs and the wall of books he'd never read but kept for show. But he looked different than I remembered. Thinner. Older. Tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. If you're watching this, Lorien, then I'm gone, and you figured out where I hid the evidence. He paused, cleared his throat. I've been documenting Vorric's theft for 11 months. At first I thought I was wrong, that I was seeing patterns that weren't there, but the more I dug, the clearer it became. He's been stealing from me for years. From us. From the family. He looked directly into the camera, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. I enabled this. I made Vorric who he is. I favored him because he reminded me of myself, the ambitious parts, the ruthless parts. I pushed you away because you reminded me of what I'd buried, the parts of myself that cared about more than profit. His voice cracked slightly. That was my failure, my sin. And I'm trying to fix it now, but I know it's not enough. It'll never be enough. He picked up a folder, held it toward the camera. This contains everything. Wire transfers. Emails between Vorric and Tahlisse planning the theft. Communications with contractors about kickback schemes. All of it documented, verified, ready for prosecution. He set the folder down. But here's what matters most, son. The Thorndale property. The Conservation Trust. That's the real legacy. That's what I should have built from the beginning, instead of another luxury development that serves no one but the wealthy. Dad leaned closer to the camera. Vorric will fight you. Tahlisse will fight you. They'll use every dirty trick, every legal maneuver, every connection they have, but you have something they don't. The truth. And the moral authority that comes with it. He smiled, sad and weary. Finish this, Lorien. Make it mean something. Make me mean something, in the end. The video ended. I sat there in the library, surrounded by the quiet rustling of newspapers and the soft clicking of keyboards, and felt the full weight of what Dad had left me. Not just evidence, not just money or land, but a mission, a chance to transform everything he'd built wrong into something right. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. We know you have something. Let's talk, like adults. Vorric. He'd figured it out. Maybe saw me leaving the jewelry shop. Maybe had someone watching Sylvan. Either way, the secret was out. Another text followed immediately. Tomorrow's hearing doesn't have to be adversarial. We can work something out, split things fairly. You don't want a war, little brother. But I did want a war, not for revenge, not for money, but because some things were worth fighting for. Some truths were worth the cost. I downloaded everything from the SD card onto a secure cloud drive, then made 3 backup copies on separate USB drives. One would go to Brecken & Associates in Portland, one would go to Mr. Castrow, and one I'd keep with me, insurance against whatever came next. My phone rang. This time I answered. Lorien. Tahlisse's voice, smooth and dangerous. We need to talk. Tonight, before this gets out of hand. It's already out of hand, I said. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The business relationships, the partnerships, the delicate balance your father maintained. If you release whatever you think you have, you'll destroy more than just Vorric. You'll destroy the entire family legacy. The family legacy is a lie built on theft, I replied. Dad knew it. That's why he gave me the tools to tear it down. Silence. Then quieter, almost gentle. He was sick at the end, Lorien, confused. Whatever he told you, whatever he left you, it came from a mind that wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking more clearly than he had in years. Then you're making a mistake, a very expensive one. The gentleness vanished. See you at the hearing tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. Come prepared to lose everything. She hung up. I gathered my things and left the library through the front entrance this time, No more hiding, no more running. The black Mercedes was gone, but I knew they were still watching, still planning, still trying to figure out how to stop what was coming. Let them try. Tomorrow morning, the truth would walk into that courtroom, and no amount of money or lawyers or threats would stop it. The courthouse opened at 7:30. I was there at 7, sitting on the stone steps with a coffee that had gone cold in my hands. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of ocean and exhaust from early traffic. Behind me, the building loomed, all granite and authority, the kind of place where lives changed in the time it took a judge to speak a single word. At 7:40 they arrived, Vorric and Tahlisse, flanked by 3 lawyers in matching navy suits. I recognized the lead attorney, Preston Veldrick, from the newspapers. High-profile corporate defender, the kind of lawyer you hired when you had everything to lose and money to burn. Vorric saw me on the steps. His expression shifted from confidence to something harder, more calculating. He said something to Tahlisse, who glanced my way with a look that could freeze blood. They walked past without speaking, disappearing into the courthouse like shadows swallowing light. At 7:55, Mr. Castrow arrived. He climbed the steps slowly, briefcase in one hand, and sat beside me. "You have it?" he asked, quietly. I patted my jacket pocket where the USB drive rested. "Everything. Then we have a chance." He paused. "But you need to be ready. They're going to come at you hard. Personal attacks, character assassination. They'll make you look unstable, unreliable, motivated by jealousy and bitterness. Let them try." Inside, courtroom 6C was already filling. Reporters in the back rows. Business associates I recognized from the tavern. Gerald Pembroke sat near the front, giving me a subtle nod when our eyes met. Judge Halloran entered at exactly 8. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and surveyed the room with the expression of someone who'd seen every trick and wasn't impressed by any of them. "We're here on an emergency motion filed by a Mr. Vorric Vale to accelerate the estate transfer," she began. "Mr. Veldrick, you may proceed." Preston Veldrick stood, all polish and precision. "Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that Mr. Lorien Dravock intends to contest the will, despite having no legal grounds to do so. We're asking the court to expedite the transfer to prevent any frivolous challenges that would tie up the estate unnecessarily." Judge Halloran looked at me. "Mr. Dravock, do you intend to contest the will?" I stood. "No, Your Honor, I don't contest the will itself." "Then what's the problem?" She looked back at Veldrick. "The problem, Your Honor, is that Mr. Dravock has been making inquiries, visiting jewelers, conducting what appears to be an investigation into the estate. This behavior suggests an intent to disrupt the legitimate transfer of assets." "Making inquiries isn't illegal," Judge Halloran said dryly. "Perhaps not, but we have evidence that Mr. Dravock has been mentally unstable since his father's death. Erratic behavior, paranoid accusations. We believe he may attempt to make false claims about my client to delay the transfer." That's when Veldrick dropped the bomb. He pulled out a folder and handed copies to the judge and Mr. Castrow. "These are medical records from St. Catherine's Hospital in Portland. Mr. Dravock was treated 3 years ago for severe anxiety and depression. He was prescribed medication for what the doctors described as episodes of dissociative behavior and paranoid thinking." My blood went cold. Those records were supposed to be confidential, sealed. How did they get them? Mr. Castrow was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, those records were obtained illegally. This is a violation of medical privacy laws." "We obtained them through proper legal channels," Veldrick countered smoothly. "Mr. Dravock signed a medical release form 3 years ago that remained active. We simply requested the records." It was a lie. I'd never signed any blanket release, but proving that would take time, and time was exactly what I didn't have. Judge Halloran studied the documents. "Mr. Dravock, is this accurate? Were you treated for these conditions?" I forced my voice to stay steady. "I sought help after my father and I had a falling out. That doesn't make me incompetent." "No one's saying you're incompetent," Veldrick said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "We're simply suggesting that grief and unresolved family trauma may be clouding your judgment. That perhaps you're seeing conspiracies where none exist." Tahlisse dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Perfect timing, perfect performance." "Your Honor," Veldrick continued, In the interest of protecting both the estate and Mr. Dravock himself from further distress, we ask that you approve the immediate transfer and close this matter." Judge Halloran was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "Do you have any evidence, Mr. Dravock, that would justify delaying this transfer? Anything concrete?" This was it, the moment where I either played the card or lost everything. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the USB drive. "I do, Your Honor, and it changes everything." Judge Halloran leaned forward. "What's on that drive, Mr. Dravock?" 8 years of embezzlement, fraud, corporate theft." I held it up. "My father spent the last year of his life documenting everything Vorric did. Every stolen dollar, every shell company, every falsified contract." Vorric shot to his feet. "That's a lie. He's making this up because he's bitter about being written out of the will." "Sit down, Mr. Tenvale," Judge Halloran said sharply. She turned to me. "You have documentation?" "Financial records, bank transfers, email communications between Vorric and my stepmother discussing how to hide the money. Video testimony from my father recorded 4 months before he died, explaining exactly what he found." I looked at Vorric. He knew. He knew everything. Mr. Castrow stood. "Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Dravock also has sealed trust documents that were filed 18 months ago. Documents that fundamentally change the nature of this estate distribution." "What kind of documents?" The judge's tone had shifted from impatient to intrigued. "The Thorndale property was never part of the public estate," Mr. Castrow said. "Arundel Dravock transferred it into a conservation trust 18 months ago, with Lorien as the sole trustee. The deed transfer was sealed, with instructions to unseal it 48 hours after the will reading." Preston Veldrick was flipping through papers frantically. "There's no record of any such transfer in the estate documents." "Because it was filed separately," Mr. Castrow replied, "as was his right. The trust was established legally, witnessed, notarized, and registered with the state. It simply wasn't part of the probate estate." Tahlisse's composure cracked. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. "This is fraud. Arundel was mentally incompetent when he supposedly created this trust. He was examined by 3 independent physicians over the course of that 18-month period," Mr. Castrow said calmly. "All confirmed his mental competency. Their reports are part of the trust documentation." Judge Halloran held up a hand. "I want to see everything. The USB drive, the trust documents, the medical reports. All of it. And I want it verified by an independent forensic accountant." She looked at Veldrick. "Your motion to accelerate the transfer is denied. In fact, I'm placing a hold on all estate distributions until we get to the bottom of these allegations." Vorric's face had gone from confident to pale. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. He has nothing real, just conspiracy theories and forged documents." "Then you have nothing to worry about," the judge replied. "Court will reconvene in 1 week. That should give everyone time to have these materials examined properly." She stood. "And Mr. Tenvale, if even a fraction of these allegations prove true, you'll be facing criminal charges, not just civil penalties." The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters were already typing on their phones. Gerald Pembroke was smiling quietly in his seat. Vorric stormed past me, so close I could smell his cologne and sweat. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Tahlisse followed, but she paused, turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "He was sick," she said quietly. "Whatever he told you at the end, whatever poison he put in your head about us, it came from a broken mind." "No," I replied. "It came from a guilty conscience finally trying to make things right." She left without another word. Mr. Castrow put a hand on my shoulder. "Well done. But this is just the beginning. They're going to fight with everything they have. Let them." Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps, breathing in the salt air, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that truth actually mattered, that justice was more than just a word judges used. My phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Mr. Dravock, this is Fennell Crestwine from the Belhaven Chronicle. I was in the courtroom. I'd like to hear more about what your father discovered. About the conservation trust, about what really happened to the estate. A reporter. The story was about to go public. Not yet, I said. Give me a week. When the forensic accountant confirms everything, when there's no question left, then I'll tell you everything. And if it doesn't check out, it will. I hung up and saw Gerald walking toward me. He had that look again, the one that said he knew more than he'd told. Your father came to see me 2 months before he died, Gerald said without preamble, told me he'd discovered something beyond the embezzlement, something worse. The week passed like a slow-burning fuse. The forensic accountant Judge Halloran appointed was thorough, spending 16-hour days combing through every file on the USB drive. Mr. Castrow kept me updated with brief texts. She's finding everything. The evidence is solid. They're going to fall hard. I spent those 7 days at a small inn outside Belhaven, going through Dad's files myself, understanding the full scope of what he'd uncovered. The embezzlement was worse than I'd thought. Vorric hadn't just stolen $300,000. The real number was closer to $1.2 million, when you factored in all the shell companies, all the fraudulent contracts, all the kickbacks from contractors who'd been overcharging the family business for years. But worse than the money were the safety violations. Gerald had been right. 3 workers injured because Vorric had bribed inspectors to approve substandard construction. 1 man still couldn't walk properly. Another had lost 2 fingers. Also, Vorric could cut costs and pocket the difference. Dad's video testimony laid it all out. He'd interviewed the injured workers, documented their stories, gathered medical records. He'd built a case that went beyond financial fraud into something that destroyed lives. On the 7th day, I returned to courtroom 6C. It was packed, every seat filled, reporters lined the walls. I saw faces I recognized from Belhaven's business community, people who'd celebrated with Vorric at the tavern just days ago, now here to watch him fall. Judge Halloran entered, and the room fell silent. I've reviewed the forensic accountant's report, she began, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. I've examined the trust documents. I've watched the video testimony. And I've consulted with the district attorney's office regarding potential criminal charges. Vorric sat perfectly still, but I could see the tremor in his hands. The evidence is overwhelming, Judge Halloran continued. Mr. Vorric Tinvale systematically embezzled funds from Harper Development LLC over an 8-year period, totaling approximately $1.2 million. He created shell companies to hide the theft. He falsified contracts and tax documents. He bribed city officials to ignore safety violations that resulted in serious injuries to workers. She looked directly at Vorric. Mr. Tinvale, you are hereby ordered to return all stolen funds to the estate. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Charges will likely include wire fraud, embezzlement, bribery of public officials, and reckless endangerment. Vorric's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Halloran held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mrs. Tahlisse Corvain, the evidence shows you were complicit in concealing these crimes. Emails between you and Mr. Tinvale discuss strategies for hiding assets and deflecting scrutiny. You are also being referred for criminal charges. Tahlisse's face had gone ashen. All the polish, all the performance stripped away to reveal the fear beneath. Furthermore, the judge said, the Dravock Conservation Trust is legally valid and binding. The Thorndale property, along with all associated assets, belongs to the trust, with Lorien Dravock as the sole trustee. The public will documents are superseded by the sealed trust agreement. She looked at me. Mr. Dravock, your father created something remarkable in his final months, a mechanism to preserve land, to right wrongs, to ensure that his legacy meant something beyond profit. The court recognizes the trust and affirms your authority as trustee. The gavel came down. Vorric stood abruptly, chair scraping. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might finally show some emotion beyond the entitled anger. But he just turned and walked out, Preston Veldrick scrambling to follow. Tahlisse lingered, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hatred, maybe, or recognition that the game was over and she'd lost. He wasn't the man you thought he was, she said quietly. At the end, he was weak, sentimental. He threw away everything he'd built for some fantasy about redemption. No, I replied. He finally became the man he should have been all along. She left without another word. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Business associates disappeared, already calculating how to distance themselves from Vorric and Tahlisse. Gerald stopped beside me. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I hope so. I know so." He handed me a card. "When you're ready to start the real work, the Conservation Trust, the Educational Center, call me. I've got 40 years of development experience, and I'd like to use it for something that actually matters." After everyone left, I sat alone in the courtroom. Mr. Castrow had gone to file paperwork. The afternoon light came through the tall windows, painting everything in gold. I pulled out the cheap watch, the $5 Casio that had started everything. The back was still open from when Sylvan had removed the SD card. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not the watch itself, but what Dad had hidden inside it. The truth. The evidence. The path forward. My phone buzzed. A text from Finel Crestwind at the Chronicle. "Can we talk now?" I typed back, "Yes. Meet me at Thorndale tomorrow. I want to show you what we're building." That night I drove to Dad's house. The estate house, technically still in legal limbo, but mine in all the ways that mattered. I walked through rooms that smelled like old books and furniture polish, past photographs of a family that had never been quite whole, until I reached his study. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The leather chair, the desk with papers still scattered across it, the wall of books he'd collected but rarely read. I sat in his chair and opened the desk drawer. Inside was a folder I'd never seen before, labeled simply Lorien. It contained photographs. Me as a kid, standing on the dock at Thorndale, fishing pole in hand. Me at high school graduation, squinting in the sun, me and Mom at the beach, building sandcastles, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. And, beneath the photos, a letter. Not sealed. Just folded once, my name on the outside in his handwriting. I opened it. "Son, if you're reading this in my study, then you found everything else first. Good. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for. I'm writing this 3 weeks before I plan to record the video testimony. 3 weeks before I set everything in motion. And I need you to know something. The anger I showed you, the disappointment, the way I pushed you away, none of that was really about you. It was about me. About my own failures. My own fears. You chose a path that required courage I never had. You chose conscience over profit. Purpose over power. And I punished you for it because it reminded me of everything I'd compromised, everything I'd buried to build what I thought was success. But you were right. You were always right. And I was a fool who realized it too late to tell you in person, so I'm telling you now, in words I'll never get to speak. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I never said it when it mattered. I'm sorry for the years we lost. I'm sorry I let my pride destroy what should have been sacred. Build something better, Lorien. Use what I'm giving you to create the legacy I should have built from the beginning. Make it mean something. Make me mean something in the end. With love and regret, Dad." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket, next to the watch. The next morning, I met Finel Crestwind at Thorndale. The property stretched out before us, 20 acres of coastal land, untouched and wild. The main house sat on a gentle rise, overlooking the water. Pine trees swayed in the salt breeze. "This is what your father wanted to preserve?" she asked, camera ready. "Not just preserve," I said. "Transform. We're going to turn this into an environmental education center. Teach sustainable practices. Host workshops on conservation. Show people that legacy doesn't have to mean exploitation." And the house? Research facility. Guest housing for students and visiting scientists. The land stays wild, protected in perpetuity. No development, no luxury resorts, just nature doing what nature does. She was taking notes, nodding. "And Vorric? Tahlisse? What happens to them?" "They face justice, criminal trials, restitution to the workers they hurt. Everything Dad documented will be used to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. Some people are saying your father was a hypocrite, that he spent 40 years building exactly what you're now tearing down. Maybe he was," I admitted, "but he recognized it, changed course, Used his last year trying to fix what he'd broken. That's not hypocrisy, that's redemption. 3 months later, the Dravock Conservation Trust officially opened. We held a small ceremony, just 20 people. The 3 injured workers Vorric's negligence had hurt. Gerald Pembroke, Mr. Castrow, Sylvan Moorish. A few environmental scientists who'd agreed to serve on the advisory board. I stood on the porch of the main house and looked out at the land, at the future we were building. In my pocket was the watch. Not the cheap Casio, but the Timex Dad had given me years ago. Time reveals all truth, the engraving said. He'd been right. Time had revealed his crimes and Vorric's theft, but it had also revealed something else. That change was possible, that legacy could be rebuilt. That truth, however painful, was worth the cost. Vorric and Tahlisse were awaiting trial. The criminal cases were solid. They'd both face years in prison, and every dollar they'd stolen would go to the victims, to the trust, to building something that actually mattered. I thought about Dad often, about the man he'd been and the man he'd tried to become, about the years we'd lost and the gift he'd left me in the end. Not money, not property, but purpose, the chance to finish what he'd started, to build a legacy that meant something beyond profit and power. Some things you inherit by blood, the good and the bad, the wealth and the wounds. But other things you earn by surviving, by refusing to repeat the mistakes of those who came before, by choosing, again and again, to build something better. I looked at the watch one more time, then closed it in my hand. Time had revealed the truth. Now it was time to build the future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.